Okay. Thank you for attending Spiritual Discourse. We appreciate your coming, joining, wanting to listen, wanting to move forward spiritually. I love that, and I love all of you very much. And I love talking about the spiritual and nothing else. Everything else is kind of boring to me. Nothing new under the sun. There's lots of opinions about that. They're all ignorant. There's only one accurate or in the ballpark thing that can be said, and that's that old saw, nothing new under the sun. The world doesn't change. The headlines are the same, just the names, dates, and details change. So the learned and conditioned expectation that somehow life can be bent, which of course would always include the notion, your own life, that life can be bent in a certain direction or into a certain form, is based on the more general notion that the world changes, the material level of things, the physical, the everyday, the ordinary, whether it's conventional or not, keeps transforming, keeps evolving, keeps changing, keeps producing something new and different. And language talks about modern times and olden times and ancient times. All of that is just ignorance, because we're still in the position of no real viable, valid way to refer to these times or the latest times as modern times. There's nothing modern about it. Modern would have to mean, the correct understanding of the correct definition would have to include that it's more advanced. Modern means we've improved. That's how every mind hears the word modern. That's how you're conditioned to hear it. The people before us were stupider, and we got born now, therefore we're smarter because things are modern. We've learned so much more. This is all propaganda. The proof is nowhere to be found. And there's lots of proof that it's the exact opposite. So you have to be very, very mindful, aware, paying attention, and giving it sufficient thought so that it becomes clear to you how language is one of the ways you're programmed, and all the associations to specific words and all the nuances of that is literally pumped into you. You didn't make it up. You didn't edit your own version of the dictionary. Every meaning any word has for you is something someone explained to you, taught you, told you, or when you were very, very small, absorbed through the linguistic ethos around you. So words are powerful, words are real, words matter, and words are highly limited, impossible to divorce from personal interpretation, societal bias, cultural significance. One word that means the same thing in 5 different languages has 5 different degrees of significance, all the way from doesn't matter at all to one of the most important things. So the spiritual path, therefore, has to include getting beyond the constraints of language so that you learn, hear, absorb, comprehend, and even analyze at a level that transcends language, because language is just too fraught, too many loose associations, too many incorrect associations, too much borrowed meaning. The language of the heart, the language you were born to understand, the language you came in with before you could use language, verbal language, not only precedes the language you were taught and learned about and picked up, but it supersedes it. On the spiritual road, you will have to get better at the linguistics of silence, the linguistics of comprehension and understanding without passing through the mental or the analytical or the conceptual level or process or aspect. You will have to directly apprehend. You will have to know, and you'll have to understand the same way as you see with your eyes and hear with your ears. It's direct. Language is an intermediate step. Somebody or some source says something to someone, let's say that someone is your set of ears, and all along the way there's a process, conscious or unconscious and unavoidable, of interpretation. So the person or source saying it has made numerous interpretations, which is why they choose the words, the phrasing, the tone, all the aspects of what and how they say what they say. So it begins with interpretation. It gets quote unquote communicated, which is quite a claim. And the situation, the circumstances, the set of conditions in which that occurs also, without fail, and understandably have to, also provide yet another or more interpretation. Because if I say the exact same sentence in the exact same way in the middle of a church, it's very different than saying it at the top of a mountain. Or if I say the exact same message from a dark basement, it's very different than saying it in the open air in front of 1,000,000 people. So there's what's said and the sayer. There's the circumstances of the saying, the set of conditions, what's going on, where, what, why, how. So interpretation, more interpretation, and then your ears immediately interpret based on your biases, your experience, how you hear words, language, meaning. And the world wants to call this communication. Meaning, I said A, it went to you, and you understood A. And when I said B, it went to you, and you understood B. And none of that happened because there's 3 levels of interpretation. So there's no way that it can, it's like that game kids play of telephone. There's no way it can start it to you and be what was meant by the speaker. And this is only the simplest, most basic substratum of what's involved in understanding the limitation of human verbal language, spoken language, written language. So the world and the worldly rely on this highly flawed medium, full of biases, prejudices, and misunderstandings, invariably, and no way around it, relies on it and treats it as if it were precise and accurately precise to a point of 0.000000001 millimeter if you were in the sheet metal business. I know about that because I worked with sheet metal, and the measurement had to be like that. You couldn't be off by even 0.0000001 micrometer. Whatever it was, it might not have been exactly that many zeros, but whatever it was the smallest gap possible to identify with the human eye and a crude instrument. So if you've never been a welder, you wouldn't know that, but I was a welder, and a good one. So language is cruder than crude. You have to learn how to hear when nothing is said. You have to learn how to hear what's really meant, what's behind everything said or communicated or written, if it's important for your spiritual journey. It's a long list. You have to learn all these things, and you have to learn how to operate in the language that has no words, where no biases or pre-assigned meanings can be employed or embedded, and where you can instantaneously, correctly comprehend. And that looks as a process much more like absorption than comprehension. Comprehension means you think you understood. Absorption means it went in. So there's no fooling yourself. There's no process to analyze, did it reach the mark? Nobody goes around, assuming you're healthy and have no lung diseases, nobody's going around, or particular environmental contaminants, nobody's going around measuring in an analytical way or using some kind of analytical process to determine, are you breathing? It's direct. The proof is you're not dead. There's movement, and you can see the in-breath and the out-breath by looking at the body. You don't need any fine-tuned instruments, any microscopes. And it's a direct living process in what is the in-breath and the out-breath and the whole breathing process. It's all based on absorption, right? You're absorbing air, oxygen, you're expelling and absorbing, expelling and absorbing. That's how you have to learn spiritually. Once you've gotten deconditioned enough and turned your back on the false material level enough to understand that words won't save you and words won't take you. Words won't take you where you want to go. Words won't bring you to God. Words are stage specific. They're stages where you need to read and listen and hear and understand, and words are necessary. And those are the early stages. The later stages have to be wordless. The later stages don't involve verbal communication. And if they do, they involve verbal communication as an envelope for the invisible communication, which is beyond words. So, understand it deeply, think about it as much as you have to, how words are deceptive without intending to be. You can't blame words, and you can't blame language, and you can't blame people. It's the nature of the beast. If you live in central Alaska and it never occurs to you to leave, you can't complain that it's cold. So because you were born as a human being and you operate in an apparent material world level, and humans use language, you can't really complain, yeah, but if what he's saying is right, if what I'm saying now has merit, that's all screwed up. Why do I have to learn it all if it's not going to take me where I really want to go, to what's important to me? Well, because you were born in Alaska, because it comes with the territory. You should have picked a different planet or a different universe where words aren't central to the conscious beings who take up the space. But because you're in this situation, it behooves you to get beyond words, to see the limitation of language, to see how the material and the worldly focused mind uses language as a weapon. It uses language to destroy and to harm and to kill and to oppress. Because if you can't see that, you can't see the limitations of language. If you can't see how it's misused, you can't see the whole picture. So you have to really understand, no matter how much it interests you or it doesn't, because some people are naturally interested in language and others aren't. But if you're a spiritual seeker, you don't have a choice. Interested or not, you have to ponder the nature of human language and transcend it so that you develop a different platform, a unrelated ability to listen, hear, and know without multi-interpretive, mediated messages. You need to hear it from the horse's mouth. You need to be able to hear what God's saying, not what people say God's saying. You need to hear what your heart communicates, not what it feels like your heart communicates or would like to communicate. You need to hear without ears and understand without mind. and know without knowledge, and comprehend without trying. You can think of it this way. The way language actually operates, and we don't notice it because we're so conditioned into it and it seems so natural and we're so used to it. It's every single day and it's all the time and it's going on in our private mind and all the rest. Why you don't notice it, the fish doesn't notice the water. So think of it this way. What if every time you ate lunch, you had to be in charge of the processes of eating and digestion? You had to make sure it all slid down, went to the right place. The digestive juices start doing their thing. All the internal organs that are directly and indirectly involved, you have to be running the controls, like a dashboard that a pilot looks at, lots of blinking lights and levers. What if you had to be in charge of all that and run that whole show, run that whole set of processes, which is quite complex and involve all kinds of things, a balance of different acids and alkalines and different substances and secreted internal stuff and intermixing with external chemical reactions and biological processes. It's all very complicated and it's all very interrelated. It's not one process. Eating, digesting, absorbing the nutrients, and eliminating what's left over is not 2 or 3 processes. It's not just your mouth, your stomach, your intestines, and your colon. Everything's involved in your physical, corporate self, your corporal self. All kinds of other organs that aren't directly related are also operating along with it in the service of the digestive and eliminative process in a human body. Your pancreas has something to do with it, your liver has something to do with it, your kidneys have something to do with it, your blood flow has something to do with it, your lungs and how much air you breathe and how well and how it's processed. All of it plays a minor key role, secondary role in the digestive process. And then there are the organs, processes, secretions, fluids, and aspects that are directly involved. That's a pretty good analogy for language. You're actually doing the controls. You're actually doing all that when you use language. It's not automatic the way digestion is. Because all those interpretations and all those thought processes and all those choosing the words and all those split second you don't notice on choices about what to reveal and not reveal, what to communicate and not to communicate, how to respond and not respond, all of it, you're actually deciding. It's not an automated process. It feels automated to you because you're so accustomed to it. Like how the first time before you knew how to drive a car, it seemed nearly impossible. But once you learned and drove a car for more than a few years, you don't even think about it. That's how you relate to language. You came in not knowing how to do language. The proof is you didn't come in knowing how to drive a car. When you came out of the womb, you had no clue how to drive a car. You had no clue about in vivo, interrelational human language communication. You had to master all of it. And you did it so well, so expertly, that you kind of see it as an automatic process that you don't have much to do with. The thought occurs to you, comes out your mouth. But that's not how it works if you really ponder it. You're actually pulling all the levers. You're actually the pilot, of a quite complex aircraft. It's just you're doing it so fast and so expertly and so with so much prior experience that it's second nature to you. You're not thinking about it, and you're not noticing it the same way as you drive from one end of town to the other, and you're essentially unaware of all the processes and decisions and choices you made going 16 miles from one end to the other. But if you think about it, of course you made choices split second, and of course nothing happened automatically or by itself. You decided everything, and you did it all. You, together with the vehicle, did it all. And that's how language works. You just have forgotten, don't notice, or it's so fast and it's so ingrained and it's so familiar that it's hard to notice. So people with weird jobs like me have to point it out to you and get you to consider what's the meaning and the effect of all that. Well, it means you think, probably, it's a general thing, it's along these lines, because everybody's different, but in some way you probably think that language is an effective way to get your point across, and that human relating has a very primary foundation in language. And I'm telling you, not true. You've communicated volumes before you've opened your mouth. You've revealed everything before you've said a word. And when you've tried to use language to control, you failed every time. It just looked like you succeeded to you, because that's how you've been taught to perceive it. And I could say 100 or 200 or maybe 300 different specific things along those lines, all of which are significant. And we'd be here way too long. I'd have to order food at least 2 or 3 times for everybody. So we can't take the time. You've just got to get it based on what I've said so far, which I think you can. And fill in the rest yourself. You have to ponder this. It's not enough to hear me talk about it. You have to take this home and do the homework. And I've talked about this many times, but I'm talking about it much more technically, scientifically, precisely than before, because you've been with me longer and you're better educated now. You can hear things you couldn't hear 5 years ago. If I'd given the same exact talk 5 years ago, you would have been lost. You wouldn't have known what I was talking about. Or you would have, but it would have been a complete misinterpretation. I'm hoping for 1% comprehension, which would be phenomenal. And probably I'm getting it, maybe even 2%. You know that joke, what's the difference between 1% milk and 2% milk? 1%. So you've heard, don't believe everything you read. And now you have to plug that into a much bigger format of don't believe anything. That's in the form of language, verbal human language. What's in the form of verbal human language besides things people say to each other? That's right, your own thinking process. Even people who think in images it still involves words. It still involves verbal processing. And there are no images that aren't immediately in the brain and the mind, which are in no way the same thing. In both levels, all images are immediately interpreted, which means put into words, put into conceptual form in some way or other. You make meaning out of the image. You assign meaning to it. And you can't do that without words. Conceptual means words are involved. So your internal processes of comprehension and connection are heavily word dominated, and your external relating to other humans. And if you pay attention, you'll notice even to animals, even to flowers and trees, you use words, even though you know that you're not going to get a verbal response. So you're heavily weighted toward the word-based language way of communicating, and it's usually pretty lost on you that you're broadcasting much louder in other languages than the verbal. This first became generally known in Western countries when psychology came up with the notion of body language, which quickly got co-opted by pop psychology, so it never went very far in the research. And you also start with the bias. Again, this is the whole modern times things. You start with the bias that people in other times, in other eras, in other places who spoke of the tree spirits or the wood nymphs or the forest fairies. You've been preconditioned, brainwashed to think, oh, those were stupid, superstitious, myth-believing, myth defined as false. That's an incorrect definition. But that's the definition you mostly have been given. So you think of them as inferior, and people of today superior. And all of that is based on a number of insane, ignorant concepts. One of the primary ones being that verbal human language is the most reliable, in essence, scientific comprehension. So there can't be wood nymphs and tree fairies and leprechauns in the meadow. And the immense, true and real knowledge of all prior peoples gets dismissed in a blink of an eye out of pure false superiority. They were all uneducated. They didn't know what we know now. So literally universal knowledge goes down the drain. And you lose all the benefit of all that's come before that had tremendous wisdom. Of course, there was tremendous ignorance too. But the general assumption you get from Western cultural bias is most of it was ignorant, and we're smarter now. We know more. And this handicaps you tremendously. Makes you closed-minded. Makes you think you know something. And closes you to the possibility of all the languages that you're not familiar with and don't involve words, mind, mental cognition, or any of the communication skills that you recognize. You can't hear God speaking, even though God's speaking all the time. You can't hear your own heart trying to tell you, trying to tell the world all kinds of things because you think it has to be in verbal language or else it isn't valid. None of this is your ignorance. It's the ignorance that's been conditioned into you. You've been taught so many false ideas. In fact, generally, you've never been taught any truth. Everything you've been taught is false. Truth is something you start seeking out when you become a spiritual seeker, usually once childhood is behind you. In some cases, much earlier. In some cases, you never have to start being a spiritual seeker. You're born that way, but that's not the most common. The most common is you fall for the whole nonsense, and at some point in a either dramatic or subtle way, you get tapped on the shoulder by the beyond, and you start seeking something more real. But you may never, and are likely never, have thought it through how you'll have to learn to communicate without language, or else you will never, never, never learn from the wind, hear from the trees, or know when God is saying something to you. What's typically referred to in human language as the still small voice within has many forms, is really many voices from many sources, and none of them are the human mind-based verbal aspect, which is purely mental, one aspect, one level. The language of love never uses words. You have learned and been taught a language that you've been told can be used to express love, but love knows no words. And you kind of know that, but I'm encouraging you to know it more. I'm encouraging you to get it in a bigger way, and it takes some pondering, some meditating on it, and it takes some expanding your limited ways of looking at things, and it takes a hell of a lot of deconditioning. So remember that the primary way the deconditioning in all its aspects and in its many, many specifics has been programmed into you and loaded into you is by and through and with words. So you don't find your way out of the forest by going deeper within the trees. So you won't find your way to the later stages of the spiritual path by reading better spiritual books or listening to higher gurus. smarter discourses, and more powerful, attending more powerful satsangs. None of that is the solution. But on some level, I'm willing to bet that you think it is. Or if I can just remember more of the basics, or if I could just understand that one or two things that I know I can feel is a blind spot in me, and if I could really put a full spotlight on that, it would lift me high enough to where I'd get it. And all of that is language-based misconception. So opening your heart, or moving Godward, or genuinely choosing truth, in that sense, means dropping your trust in language and being willing to learn entirely new languages you didn't even know exist. To some degree, you've already experienced that involuntarily. It came to you. Hearing me say that, some things probably, I'm more than willing to bet, occurred to your mind of what that has looked like in your case, because it'll be very different for different people. But you'll have some sense, probably, of what that refers to in your case. So I've talked about the difference between feeling and emotions, and I've defined them just for our purposes as emotions being like everyday weather, but feelings and the feeling capacity as being the central aspect of human life. You feel your way to God, you feel your way to truth, you feel into reality. You don't figure out reality. You don't mathematically solve reality. You give yourself to reality. And you do that through a feeling process, which is not suggested in how you've been programmed or conditioned to hear the meaning of the word feeling or feelings. So you have to redefine that for yourself also as part of all this, and understand that when, for the sake of a discussion like this one, we say feeling, we're talking about the wholeness of human life. We're talking about the whole person using their whole self with all its capacities. Not just you think something, you feel something, you have a physical sensation. We're talking about everything that is human experience is captured and meant by the word feeling in the way we're trying to use it. I'm trying to give you the divine definition. What feeling means when you find it in certain paragraphs of the divine plan for human beings. And of course, there are no paragraphs. But it's liberally there. So your feeling capacity means your ability to be a total human being in every way. You have accepted and allowed and begun cooperating with more full humanity. and as you and the potential in you. Gurdjieff said over and over, you're not a human being until you've made yourself one. Until then, you're a cheap imitation. And he also added, was quick to add, and most people die never having become human beings. Essentially, they're robots. That was his word. You live as a robot. Obviously, what he meant by that was fairly straightforward. You're just a computer program operating. You're conditioned. Maybe more than any other spiritual master besides Osho, he focused on conditioning and deconditioning. Tried to teach those who came to him that you're conditioned way more than you realize, and the brunt of the spiritual obligation is to decondition. And he came up with many methods for that, and used many ancient methods and modified them for handy-dandy 20th century use. And he understood that this is a symbolic universe. And he used that in his methodologies. But you have to be as intelligent as Gurdjieff. And anybody who was ever in the same room with him said his intelligence was overwhelming. You felt like a mental midget in the same room with him. You have to be as smart as Gurdjieff. You really do. Because you have to understand all this. And you don't have to have a gigantic intellect or guru eyes. You have enough intelligence. You have enough capacity that this is not setting the bar too high. You should accept that you have the ability, absolutely. Or else the beyond wouldn't have tapped you on the shoulder in whatever way it did. Wouldn't have started you down the spiritual road because you weren't ready, weren't willing, or weren't able. That's why you're on that road, millions of others aren't. So now you have all these obligations and responsibilities and re-educations that you have to contend with. And I'm just, in this discussion, this discourse, focusing on one specific one, recognizing the limitations of human language that you have been conditioned into, and literally shaped so that what you think of as your perception is simply an outcropping of how you've been programmed linguistically and culturally. If that weren't true, if you'd never been programmed, if you'd never been influenced, if there were no cultural leanings, to quote Borat, you'd see God all the time, everywhere, automatically, from the first second till every second till the last second. You wouldn't need spiritual life because you would directly see, nobody could ever fool you that life isn't spiritual life. The way you've been fooled through by misuse and weaponization of language to control your beliefs and perceptions. That there's life and then there's spiritual life. That's like saying there's your hand and then there's your wrist, your palm, and your fingers. What do you mean they're not the same? life and spiritual life refers to the same thing. But language has made a division, has been used to create a misconception in you that there's a division. So you're searching for God. You're looking for the right place where the division called God is, and God is indivisible. So first you gotta get your terms right, and then you have to abandon all terms. And that's terrifying, because it means you have to be a non-knower on the most basic level. Even words become obstructions, too much indulgence, luxuries you can't afford. You have to become the truly divine fool. You have to not know all the way. That's the biggest challenge anyone can give you. Remove all false knowledge. Correct interpretation is, if it's knowledge, it's false knowledge. So remove all false knowledge means remove all knowledge. Be a non-knower in the most real and simple and basic and unitary way. You don't know anything. Anything you think you know, immediately translate it for yourself correctly. Oh, that means I don't know it, and I'm using it as a hand in front of my eyes to not see, and as fingers in my ears to not hear. Anything you think you know operates like that. You have been culturally programmed to relate to quote-unquote knowledge the same as a table. It's just another object, set of objects. You collect knowledge and you arrange them on the shelf, and you keep them for future use, like your pots and pans. Oh, now I need this one. I'm going to fry, so I need the frying pan. I'm going to boil, so I need the cooking pot. Oh, I'm going to talk about such and such, so I need this box of knowledge. You put it on a shelf and keep it, and it piles up. You dust it off. Some of it you use every day, some of it you use only rarely. But all of it prevents actual direct knowing. Direct knowing doesn't involve knowledge and doesn't feel like you know anything. And everybody's gonna understand this. It feels like you're discovering it for the first time. Everybody's had this experience. And not one person would ever be able to tolerate listening to me who hasn't had this experience. But you didn't make much of it because you're too pre-programmed to believe in language and believe in beliefs. In fact, that's the primary way that societies and culture get you to put a lot of stock in beliefs, which is a very superficial level of mental operation, is by investing a lot of meaning into language, and then that is used to convince you that beliefs are a profound aspect of language. If you can state it as a belief, you're onto something. You've garnered something for yourself. And in the deeper way, whether you perceive it that way or not, it suggests to you that now you have some knowledge, and you don't. The only knowledge that will ever help you is the knowledge that you don't know anything. And that knowledge is not a set of objects or a set of sayings or a set of correct understandings. And you have to walk in naked, which means divested of false knowing, because how can you really find out for real what really is important if you already think you know a whole bunch of things that you actually don't know and can't know and are useless to you, unless it makes you more the human being fully and wholly that you're meant to be. It has no significant use for you. It doesn't help you enough. It doesn't give you enough. It doesn't grow anything in you that goes with you. This is why scholars tend to be stupid. They put all their eggs in the basket of knowledge because they've really, and it's not their fault, they've been dazzled and therefore believe more deeply than someone else possibly that the more you know and the more deeper you know it, the closer you are to the truth. That truth is the amassing of the most possible knowledge in the most correct and precise ways. Get enough of that, and it reveals truth, turns into truth, delivers you to truth, becomes truth. That enough of the quantity delivers the quality that is actually what people are referring to when they try to use the word truth. That's the base idea going on there. And that's why scholars are more lost than you are, unless you're a scholar. They devote their whole life to amassing objects of knowledge, sets of knowledge that they relate to as objects. And they are supported by the world, the worldly approach, as these are the experts. And what they're experts in is refusing to actually know, because they've concluded that I know more than most, therefore I know. And that means they're in a hopeless situation. They can't discover or know anything. The truth can't even get faintly nearby because they're well sealed off in the delusion of I already know. How can somebody come give you a big envelope of money if you think you already have the greatest amount of wealth in the world? You don't need this paltry envelope of money. Okay, there's $50 billion in the envelope, but so what? You have way more than that. When you actually have nothing. When you're actually essentially penniless. That's everyone's position, but it's more poignant for those who pursue the road of scholarliness because they think it'll take them to truth. And it just burdens them with false objects and poor substitutes for actual knowing. Knowledge is a noun, knowing is a verb. And this is a verb universe. So your spiritual assignment is to become a complete and whole human being, which is how you came in. You were born as one. but you're so full of knowledge that you don't know that. And you're trying to get better knowledge so that you can succeed in becoming a real human being. But that better knowledge is an idea you were conditioned into, that there is such a thing. And second, and this is the most pernicious of all, is that you just never really wake up to the fact that your most personal and elemental perception, what you feel and sense bodily and what you see and hear with your senses, everything that can be bundled under the category perception, you're taught to trust more than anything. And even in spiritual circles, we say your experience, the experiential, is what matters most. But that even also is based on the idea that your perception is reliable and your perception has some kind of base in actual reality, whereas your perception is mostly molded by your conditioned position, your linguistic interpretation, and your cultural feed. If all that was magically removed with a magic wand, you wouldn't even know what you were perceiving, but you would certainly be perceiving wildly differently, the same way as if you compared how you're experiencing and perceiving now to if you took a large superdose of LSD and what you'd be perceiving and sensing 2 hours from now when it's fully kicked in. It would be psychedelic. And essentially, you'd have no way of accounting for it. And that's your unfortunate position that you're not responsible for, is you've been put in the position, educated into the position that you can account for a lot. And the way we do that accounting heavily involves language. But it's all based on what we perceive. But your perception is like loaded dice. The house always wins. So the worldly conditioning has preset what you experience as what you perceive for yourself. You hold it as personal and as at least more accurate than any other way of experiencing, but it is in fact totally programmed. It's as if you're watching a movie and the movie goes on for 9 hours, and you've been in the theater now for 4 or 5 hours, and you've completely forgotten. You're so engrossed in the movie, and it is quite dramatic and engrossing, and the characters are compelling, and you have completely forgotten that you're in a movie theater. You've completely forgotten you're watching a two-dimensional screen. You feel like you're right in the action. And you lose yourself in it. And for that suspended reality time that you're in that position, you're operating as if absolutely that movie is the world and your life, and you're interacting with the characters. And everybody's had that experience since they invented movies. And nobody listening to me was born before they invented movies. So that's your position. You have to think about this. You're engrossed in a long and well-made movie that you've completely forgotten you've got a life outside the movie theater. You've even completely forgotten you're sitting in a seat in a movie theater. You're experiencing yourself as you're part of this movie, but you're not. You bought a ticket. You have a life that has nothing to do with what's on the screen. In fact, everybody on the screen died years ago. It's an old movie. It stars Spencer Tracy. That's your actual position, because you have been culturally and linguistically programmed to have the movie experience, the engrossing movie experience. So not only do you have the spiritual obligation, if you want God for real and the true spiritual, not only do you have the obligation of transcending language, but you have to stop believing your own perceptions, which you've been massively conditioned to believe in profoundly. It's your base experience of life, but it isn't. You've just been told that's the correct, in many ways you've been taught and told that's the correct interpretation, but that's all and everything and nothing more than that. It's just an interpretation that you've been pre-programmed for. So it isn't about taking risks or dropping acid. It's about recognizing that you are on an acid trip right now and it isn't real. And that's what you're programmed for. And you need to get out of the trance, off the drugs. If you want God, you've got to give up your addictions, and you've got to quit having induced and chemically manipulated experiences. That's not an unfair wording for what the effect of your linguistic programming is, your cultural programming, all your conditionings and all the levels from all the sources amounts to you being in a 24/7 drugged up state. If you want God, you got to go sober. You got to give up all recreational drugs. You've got to be willing to be lost at sea. You have to be willing to go through detoxification. Essentially, the spiritual path is detoxification and deconditioning, followed by disorientation. Because now you have no basis for anything. You know your perceptions are manipulated. You know your interpretations are barriers. You know even that your linguistic prowess is a hindrance to truth and God and limits your capacity for love. So now what? Now you have to be willing to be adrift in the middle of the ocean, not just without a paddle, without a boat. Because all these falsities and crutches have to be removed for you to have a chance. And none of that will happen or is possible ever, except through the one God-given means that will convince you that it's not dangerous and it could work out. The one God-given means that the very experience and fact of it proves it to you without saying or doing anything. Guru. without guru, you won't let yourself be adrift without a boat or a paddle. But when the influence of guru reaches you, you miraculously and to your own complete amazement end up saying, oh well, I guess there could be worse things. Adrift in the middle of the ocean without a boat or a paddle. He says, it's okay. And you'll eventually, like a piece of driftwood, float your way to God. Now that I've realized I know nothing, I don't have an alternative, so okay, I'll sign up for that. It's your only life raft. It's the only life raft out there. Everything else is just a set of beliefs. That's an imaginary life raft. Because the guru tends to be, not always, but tends to be in some form real, a person, a mountain, a genuine experiencing, a relatable source. Someone who is like you or something that you understand. Because it isn't always a person, but usually. So we're trying to include as much as we can so that your thinking gets assaulted as much as possible. So these preconceived notions get broken up like pieces of ice and float away and dissolve. So only the power of the experience of the presence of Guru in your life has the oomph, the wow factor that hit you right between the eyes effect of, okay, I guess I had less options than I thought, and I've been trying to do it in ways that I now can see, because it's been indicated to me, have no chance of working. And it's not my fault that I've been brainwashed by ignorant, well-meaning often, but still ignorant people into thinking that these methods will work. And if they were going to work, you and those people would all know God, and there'd be a whole different kind of discussion. So it's proven already by the entire history of everything that none of that works. The material level doesn't work to get to God. It only works as a merry-go-round. So the fact that most of the world is willing to settle for a whoopee merry-go-round ride is not your problem. Your problem is you have to go the hard way and get off the merry-go-round. And you don't know what it's going to be like, and you have to have the trust and the faith that at least it's better than the countless ways they're guaranteed to never work and take me nowhere where I want to go. Because if you have ever gotten to somewhere you actually, in the deepest way, wanted to go, you'd be there now, and there'd be no seeking or searching or spiritual anything. You'd be satisfied, and you'd say, I'm done. And you'd never listen to me for 1 second, because you'd have no need. And whatever you call that would be more than enough, even if it had nothing to do with God. If you've attained that which you seek, you don't keep searching. If you're looking for the needle in the haystack, once you find the needle, You don't bother with the haystack at all anymore. Not one piece of hay do you bother with. So if that's not your position, if you're not 100% satisfied, fulfilled, and I got the needle, and I know it, it's not, I've been falsely taught that I have the needle, but I have nothing. And the whole haystack is laughing at me. The proof that what I'm telling you is valid enough is the fact that you cannot legitimately and honestly and candidly say, even to yourself, I'm completely fulfilled and there's nothing left for me to find. I'm satisfied to the point of it wouldn't be possible to have other, bigger, deeper, or further satisfactions of any kind. I'm 100% not hungry and can feel I never will be again. And 100% not thirsty, and I will never need to grab a drink ever again. Unless that's true, your searching and your seeking is intelligent. But you will have to leave all priorly used and taught means behind and discover means you haven't even imagined that have nothing to do with language, nothing to do with knowledge or even knowing. And you will have to drift your way. Like a piece of driftwood, you will have to drift your way and trust that the current will eventually deposit you from this river of seeking straight into the ocean of truth and drop you off at the shore of God. It's your only hope. There's no other argument for it other than what you experience and feel when you recognize and experience the presence of something or someone you recognize as this is my guru. That is your only clue. But it dwarfs everything else. I don't have to say that to you, you know it. I just have to point out to you that all else is a dead end. And you don't have to be fooled anymore that there might be some other method or some other road that I just haven't come across yet. So in the spiritual game, there's only one basket to put your eggs in. And all the eggs have to go in. And that's all Guru is. A basket somewhere to put your eggs so that you can go forward. Okay, that's enough for one night. So remember that discourse is when the guru is talking to you with words to communicate to you that words are useless.